Wilfred Owen's Dulce et Decorum Est is a poem that depicts a mustard gas attack during World War One. And before we look at the actual lines of the poem, powerful though they are, I think the poem gets even more power if we get into the background of Wilfred Owen as not just a poet, but also as a man and as a soldier. Wilfred Owen was a soldier in World War One who had gotten together with some friends of his, and the friends decided that a great responsibility they had beyond just being a good soldier was that they had a responsibility for seeing warfare and what warfare currently was and reporting what they saw to the people back home, the people of England. And so this group formed Wartime Poets. This group felt like the picture of warfare they had heard growing up, the picture of warfare that was a glorious one similar to the poem that you'll read if you've not already, Charge of the Light Brigade. They felt that the glory of war they had been reading about and listening to as they grew up while they were children, dreaming of glory one day. They felt that these poems were lies based on what they saw and the nature of warfare as it was in World War One. And not to have too much of a history level in World War One, but the war was a terrible war as far as the the dangers that a soldier would face. The dangers included hygiene and disease being a huge slaughter factor for soldiers. We see this also, not just disease, but a lack of supplies, a lack of provisions. We see this in the poem because the men are marching without shoes. We'll get to this image. It's one of my favorite ones from the poem, but it just shows that these men are not well supplied, and few soldiers in World War One were. Not only did they face just dangers of supplies, starvation, disease, weather, they of course also had the danger of the enemy soldier, whether it be bullet fire, whether it be what we see here is probably one of the most terrible forms of death, and that would be through one of the earliest forms of chemical warfare. We have of World War One, we have the use of mustard gas, which people quickly got together and decided, part of the Geneva Convention, that this would not be an appropriate warfare parameter anymore. Mustard gas and other similar gases are against Geneva Convention. And I think when we look at the imagery of the soldier who's caught in the mustard gas attack, we can understand why the powers that be were able to come together and just kind of decide that this is not the way. That it sounds a silly sentence to say, but this isn't how society conducts a civil war, a civil warfare, civil by meaning, just the appropriate, respectful way to combat. And some more background on Wilfred Owen. He was a soldier who was on the front lines. He wanted to be where the combat was so that he could best report back in his poetry. He could write about what he was seeing, and he could send this poetry back to his countrymen, and he felt like he would best be able to portray what warfare genuinely was. He was actually wounded in action, and he was taken off the front lines, of course, to recuperate. And the legend goes, I can't find if this is historically accurate or not, but I tend to believe it just because it makes a better story for me, at least. But legend goes that Owen was given the option to either continue to serve off of the front line or return to the front line. He had gotten news recently that a friend of his, who was also a wartime poet, was killed in action. And so he decided that his best place would be back on the front line because there needed to be someone, in Owen's heart at least, there needed to be someone there to see what warfare really was and who would have the guts and the voice to report what warfare really was back home, to the young people who had been lied to like he was, and who were continuing to be lied to by the poetry and the literature that had saturated British books and things like this. And so he returned to the front lines, and unfortunately, he did die in combat. In fact, another legend goes that Wilfred Owen's mother actually received the news of her son's death as the church bells were tolling in the town to signal the end of the war, the signing of the treaty. And so I think knowledge of that does a couple of things. One thing I find that I have some students, not as many anymore, but I used to have some students who had a real problem with Owen's voice in this poem. They felt that his voice about warfare, they really basically said it was not a very patriotic voice, that his complaint about warfare and the nature of warfare, some students said it was cowardly. And I think if you understand that he's not someone reporting about warfare from the luxury of his study back home. He's a soldier on the front lines. I think that that's important to know and to respect as well, and also to know that he was a man who ultimately chose a course of action that led to his death, but he chose this what he felt was a greater necessity, necessary, even greater than his own safety, that basically he sacrificed himself in order to have this poem and other poems like it, uh, to 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 have someone who could see what was happening, who had the skill to poetically portray this to people who weren't there. And I think if you look at the imagery he's able to use, you see that he was a very talented poet as far as he's able to get us to see the horrors of warfare. And I've never been in warfare. I hope I never do have to, because this poem does a really good job, for me at least, of letting me see the horror of the front line for what it really is. I don't feel like this is exaggerated. I don't feel like this is embellished. I feel like these are things that Wilfred Owen actually saw. And I mean, if you think about it, the power of the imagery, he has seen it. He was there in the front line. He had friends every day who suffered similar horrors to what he describes here in the poem. Think about some of the lines we have here. This is not a very long poem, but it's rich in the imagery that we have. The metaphors and the similes are just, they're good, they're powerful, they hit you in the gut. And these include, of course, very well the severe exhaustion that the soldiers face. Let's look at the poem quickly. We have some great lines letting us know how tired these men are. Keep in mind that these men are actually in retreat. They're not charging, they're trying to get back to safety, so they are in retreat. But these guys are not running. Notice that it says that they're bent double like old beggars under sacks. So these young men, war has aged them. They're knock-kneed, coughing like hags. That's another extreme age image we have here, that these young men are made old too soon. They're marching as asleep. These men are being fired on. We have here that there's the 5.9 shells exploding all around them. Drunk with fatigue, deaf even to the hoots of gas shells dropping softly behind. So think about how tired you have to be if you are ordered to run away from the enemy gunfire, and your run, which I think I'd be running as fast as I could, but you're not able to run. You're limping. You're marching as asleep. If any of you have ever been tired enough, you get this idea of drunk with fatigue, because once you're so tired, you do feel that you're in an inebriated state, that your senses are altered and not for the better. Um, my favorite line probably is here, that these men, they have lost their boots, but they limp on bloodshot. And what that means is that they do have makeshift shoes. The shoes, their feet are shod with their dried blood. And so this congealed dried blood and grime has formed just a makeshift soul that these men can march upon. And that's just a great, terrible line to let us know the condition of these men. And then, of course, there is a bit of energy shown by these troops, and the energy comes with the gas attack, this announcement of gas, gas, quick, boys. They have to show some energy here because if they're not fast enough, if they can't get their helmets in on time, then we see what happens because unfortunately one young man is not able to get his helmet secured in time, and this is the victim, one of the victims, I should say, that we see of the poem. This is the one who we ultimately see through the speaker's eyes. We see him die in this mustard gas attack. And so let's go to that imagery of the drowning man, because he is described as a drowning man, the soldier who's caught in the gas attack of mustard gas. And the drowning metaphors that we have in imagery, it's quite fitting. We have as if under a green sea. This would make sense because the gas masks, the eye lenses would not be clear like our eyeglasses of today, but they'd be more like old-timey soda pop bottles. They'd probably be green or brown. The lenses would not be clear. And so part of the imagery we have here is the men are looking out at what they're seeing here of their friend dying in this mustard gas attack. They're looking out through safely lensed eyes that are they're seeing the green of the safety that their lenses have uh, provided them. But we also have the imagery of the man drowning. And unfortunately, not to be too gruesome, but the effects of mustard gas are actually that they liquefy your lungs, that the sacs of your lungs that inflate and contract, that it causes those sacs to liquefy, and that you actually end up drowning on your own blood, which we see here, that our drowning man here, the drowning is more than just an image, that he is actually drowning on his own blood. And we also have here the imagery of not just these tired soldiers and not just the horror of this attack and this young man who dies in a terrible way. We have the imagery of, I watch a lot of war movies, and one thing I really like in war movies is you almost always have a character who dies heroically in battle or a character who dies unexpectedly. It may be a comic relief character or a character we've grown to love, and there's always a point where the soldiers gather around and they have a moment with their heads bowed, and someone may say a few kind words, and you'll hear that dramatic music swell in the background. We have none of that in here. All these soldiers do is pause just long enough to throw his body in the back of a cart, and on they continue their march. There's no moment of glory for this soldier. All that happens is we have our speaker march behind the wagon, and the speaker sees every now and then the cart that the body is on will hit a bump, and some of that blood in the lungs will froth out. So there's no glory here that a lot of these young soldiers who had heard the old lie, which we'll get to in a moment, they would go to distant shores to combat. Uh, and one of the main motivations they would have is to seek glory. And so Wilfred Owen here is able to show us here you have that moment of glory, which should be what they've heard before, a soldier dying in battle. But this young boy, I say that, but this soldier is given no moment of glory. He's given no respect. His friends just have to pick him up and keep on going because if they stop, they'll join him. We see, though, that our speaker, although he does escape the he physically escapes the gas attack. He's not able to emotionally escape the effects. And this is before really we have the term post-traumatic stress disorder or anything like that, which we of course know is very real today and requires uh, definite support systems in order to help alleviate. They didn't have any of that back in Owen's time. And we see here, though, that the effects were very real back then as they are now. We have the speaker who's haunted by what he sees. And it's terrible when he says to his audience that if they were there, if we were to see what he saw, if we were to waken up in peaceful sleep and we'd waken with a scream in our throat because of the dream that we can't get away from, the dream of what we saw, then we wouldn't continue to say the old lie. And this really shows that how terrible is it that you think about the last bastion of safety that you have, the last thing that's yours. If you're tired or if things are bad, you always have your dreams. I mean, think about how important dreams are. And here we have a soldier who his dreams have been corrupted. He can't go to sleep for peace anymore because his sleep has been perverted by the horrors of war that he's seen. He carries that with him, and it manifests when he closes his eyes. When he closes his eyes, he can't escape the image of what he's seen in the past. And so this goes back to the old lie that Owen would feel a need to speak against. And the old lie would be that it's a good thing, it's altogether fitting and appropriate to die for one's country. That's a basic translation of our poem title, Dulce et Decorum Est. And notice that he does say that the target of this old lie is children. This goes back to some of the imagery. He says that they are innocent tongues. These aren't people who have, a lot of times we callously, I think, as a society, we will hear news of soldiers die, and some of us may say, or even feel that, you know what, these soldiers knew what they were signing up for. Owen takes that safety, well, not safety, I guess he takes that apathy away because he says these soldiers don't know what they're signing up for. They think that they're going here to fight a glorious war. They have no idea what war is really like. And so these children, these soldiers, these young soldiers, are innocent as children. And we are continuing to lie to them. I think that this poem has a lot of dramatic irony because our poet here, I've talked about the dangers of saying that a poet and a speaker are the same. I tend to do that with this poem, though. I tend to do that a lot because I think it's it just makes sense to me for an author to write about what they know. But they say that you shouldn't do that. I think here, since we know the rest of Owen's story, it adds a layer of dramatic irony. That's where you know something that, as an audience, that maybe others involved don't know. We know here that Owen is writing this, that Owen is writing as a soldier. He's writing with a soldier's voice, talking about an escape he was able to escape, yet it did impact him permanently. And we also know that Owen ultimately was not able to escape the war that he wrote about. So it's a terrible poem, but it's a great poem. And I think you'd be hard pressed to find a better use of imagery. This really does show the old cliche that, you hear a picture is worth 1,000 words. I'd say that the imagery here does challenge that cliche, that words can be very powerful and words can show us things that we're not able to see. So I hope you enjoyed this and get some help from it. Thank you.